Good evening, race fans, and welcome back to TRTM for tonight's coverage of VSR Phoenix Season 8 Round 9. As ever, I am Regan Clark, and you join us on what appears to be bright and sunny conditions here at the historic Autodromo Nazionale di Monza, a jewel of Italian motorsporting history founded in 1922, historically sandwiched in between the opening of the Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps before it in 1921 and the Circuit de la Sarthe thereafter in 1923. Monza was the world's third ever dedicated racing course after Brooklands in 1907 and Indianapolis in 1909, and it was mainland Europe's first. It has been defined over its 103-year operational lifespan by a religious commitment to speed, a straight-line intensive track only momentarily broken up by the occasional chicane or fast right-hander. Monza will see the lowest aero setups emerge as we enter the second half of the championship here in Season 8. And after some data gathering in various sister series as well as today, just before we've gone live, it's looking pretty optimistic to say the least for Ford and BMW as we come to the end of a very short introductory free practice before we head on to our return to a 20-minute qualifying session. As we wait for the arrival then of the quali session, it has been a very, very interesting last couple of weeks. To recount the results of last week, we saw a historic first since the introduction of the gold, silver, bronze system for a silver driver to win overall. That came courtesy of Soviet Mario at round 7 of the championship in Snetterton. We'll talk more on that in a moment here as we just quickly wait for the arrival of qualifying. We'll be more onto the discussion as qualifying ticks over, not only to how things have been panning out over the course of the championship thus far, but how things are looking to pan out today. So let's catch on board with the driver first out into the fray as we start to recount the way things have been going over the course of Season 9. Not Season 9, sorry, over Season 8 as we hit round 9 of the championship. Long day. The season opener at Watkins Glen gave us an exciting new prospect for the season with a knockout victory by newcomer OSR Saturn, much to the chagrin of newly defending VSR Phoenix champion Just Boris, who retired from round 1 after a collision with lapped traffic. Heading into round 2 at Spa, OSR Saturn took a mystery sabbatical of which he is yet to return from, allowing Boris to clamber back to the captain's seat, leading the fray onto his first win of the season. Meanwhile, a new talent had crept in. And with 2 visits to the podium after round 2 of the championship, the number 54 Aston Martin of White Doctor led the Season 8 standings. Things would only get more interesting as we rolled on rounds 3 and 4 in the season's first of 3 sprint races at the Red Bull Ring. Double the races, double the qualifying, and double the mayhem. The day race of round 3 saw White Doctor break the podium curse to take his first career win in VSR, leading the charge after a hectic qualifying session. The night race that followed for round 4 spawned ample controversy as a desperate lunge through the Niki Lauda curve at turn 1 saw a major collision that took both Just Boris and fellow Gold Championship driver Regent out of competition. The aftermath of which was Regent, a growing talent in gold and prominent figure of Season 7, withdrawing from competition in its entirety. This opened the floodgates after a technical malfunction on the then leading Aston, to give rise to a spectacular sight. In a historic first, a silver category driver took the race, so we mistakenly identified it there as Soviet. It was a historic first silver category win for SN Quis in round 4 in the 888 Ford. His heroic jaunt at the Red Bull Ring earned him a spot in gold from round 5 onwards. Heading out of the Red Bull Ring, nerves were at an all-time high in Silverstone, with tensions would boil over in gold, with Elite Cassie and the Blue Frog going toe-to-toe in a hectic middle and final sector, with several instances of contact. Up front, it was back into the comfort zone, another knockout performance by Just Boris. He claimed his second win in the season, firm and solid control by the 999 Lamborghini. At round 6, bizarre weather and differing strategies left many guessing who would emerge victorious, but with a level head and fantastic vehicle mastery, White Doctor picked up his second career win with Aston Martin, amidst the wet and wild conditions offered up by round 6 of the championship. And then, of course, to recount what happened last week at the second of 3 sprint rounds this championship thus far, as we head into the second half and out of the first, we saw that controversial lap 1 turn 1 incident between Just Boris and Soviet Mario. Ultimately, the number 26 will go on to pick up his first ever VSR Phoenix career win, with Boris taking home a meagre podium finish. However, the race that would follow on from that, round 8, was back once again into the commanding seat for Just Boris, taking his third win this season thus far. As we stay on board at the moment with VSR Funky Fish, in the number 982, let's quickly get on to the discussion of qualifying predictions and balance of performance as we head into today's round at Monza. Our qualifying predictions came in just earlier today with just Boris leading the timing charts with a 1:47.235. That's 2 tenths ahead of Audi Pete in second. And you'll note that this is really where the lines get blurred between gold and silver categories, the Premier and subdivision categories. You can see from first all the way down to 10th, it's a sequential order of gold to silver. And with Tommy in third there, only a few tenths away, you'll note that all the way down to 8th position, all of the drivers are within 1 second of pole position. VSR Otzi then predicted at 4th, Wishful Winnings 5th, Antion in 6th, Tyler Vermack 7th, Tommy Johansson in 8th, Soviet Mario predicted 9th, and Boyshay predicted in 10th position. For balance of performance, you'll be laughing if you're this one here. The number 982 Porsche VSR Funky Fish will be benefiting from a minus 29 kg reduction heading into this round. That's any of the other Porsches as well, so bear in mind drivers like Funky Fish, like Jayco14 and like Tommy will all be benefiting from 29 kilos shed away from the vehicle coming into today's round. Lexus losing 11 kilos and Audi losing 1. Then up into the positives, Mercedes gaining 2, Lamborghini gaining 3, Aston Martin gaining 4, McLaren gaining 5, Ferrari gaining 9, Ford gaining 12, and for the first time in quite some time, BMW, the heaviest of the bunch, with 13 kilos added onto the M4. Looking at the division standings here, as we're on board with VSR Funky Fish over the course of his first flying laps in the number 982, starting us off in gold. It's an 87-point gap at the moment between the leading two of White Doctor and Just Boris. Now, Boris has done very, very well, to say the least, to bring himself back into championship contention after such a back foot start in the opening 3 weeks of competition. Saw 2 DNFs by last season's champion. He made his way up to second place after Snetterton last week, and is only 10 points ahead of Blue Frog to round out the gold podium. Then looking down into silver, it's still a close affair between Otzi and Grizz. Otzi gunning for his consecutive silver championship bid since last season, where he took the crown in the silver championship and opted to stay there, which was a bit of an odd move to say the least. He was quite practically gifted a free seat in gold, opted to stay where the competition was richer. It's a 10-point gap between the pair heading into this round, and Grizz could find his way to the advantage. We'll be more onto that discussion in a moment's time. Looking down in bronze, it's 20 points between Abok and Smiler. Abok looking to be on prime position to make his way to silver come season 9. So we're still on board with Funky Fish. Let's get a gander around the track there as he invalidated his time. Looking here with Wishful Winnings. Now last round in Snetterton, or last rounds I should say, with round 7 and 8 being covered last Wednesday, he made his way up into the Gold Championship standings. Looking at where that places him at the moment, he's obviously quite some way back, as he was considered for the longest time a reserve and therefore not gaining credible championship points. Right now he's sandwiched in between Tommy and Giles towards the back of the Gold Standing Championships. Looking on with him at the moment. We'll stay on board with the Ferrari, as I'd say this is definitely your middle of the road when it comes to the discussion of today's most prevalent topic. At a place like the Temple of Speed, straight line speed is the modus operandi, but of course it's unwise to put all of your eggs into one basket and have your car be an absolute bullet and suffer for all 11 corners and 3.6 miles of FIA Grade 1 that Monza has to throw in one's direction. Now, as we stay on board with the Ferrari, if we take a look at some of the data we've been able to gather here, now this was in a speed trap we set from, if we look on the track map, right at the end of turn 11 and then down towards turn 1 between Parabolica and the Variante Rettifilo. And in this data, we were able to uncover quite some interesting information. As we see heading down towards the Variante della Rosa, we'll get a full tour of the track after this discussion, as right now Ferrari find themselves towards the back in terms of straight line speed, having clocked in 172 miles an hour or 277 kilometers per hour. Now that seems to be one of the closer rates here, as they find themselves towards the back. There's only one manufacturer actually behind them, that being McLaren, who loses out per lap 2 miles an hour at a top end of 170 miles an hour, and losing out 3 kilometers an hour for a top end of 274. Elsewhere ahead of them, it's joint first for both Lexus, Ford and BMW, all clocking in at a whopping 174 miles per hour. Now you may think 2 miles an hour difference isn't going to make or break a race. It absolutely will when you start to consider the adage of slipstream. It's hot and dry conditions today, high pressure air, tough to cut through for these cars even on the lowest of aero setups. So slipstream racing is going to quickly become the norm here when engines start to give way. And for Ford and BMW, they'll find themselves very, very close to one another. Of course, we've seen erroneous examples already with Just Boris in the Lamborghini, which clocked in a 277 km/h or 172 mile/h top end speed. That puts it right at eye level with their contemporaries at Audi, of course, owing to the fact they share the same 5.2 litre V10 engine. And they also stand 10 toes alongside Aston Martin with their V8 Vantage and Ferrari on screen there, courtesy of Wishful Winnings in the 296. All of them clocking 172 miles an hour. They are at a 2 mile/h disadvantage. McLaren at a 4 mile/h disadvantage. So having a look around the order here for our next driver to the line, the number 28 here of VSR Chris. Now this is one such example of Aston Martin. They'll be in that sort of bulk of the crowd for 172 miles an hour. There'll be a lot of slipstream racing to be anticipated there between Audi, Ferrari, Lamborghini and Aston Martin as they all clock in almost the exact same time to a T there. Porsche, the dark horse of this, as they actually find themselves just behind and then ahead of McLaren with a top end of estimated about 171 miles per hour. So this is definitely an interesting sight to say the least, because for the drivers and machines that are clocking in your bang average top end speed here, they're still finding themselves towards the top of the timing charts. And the key to that is maneuverability. Like I mentioned, it would be unwise to stick all of your eggs in the same basket and expect the car to perform lap in, lap out to a T. You're going to suffer on all 11 corners on a low downforce setup. You'll suffer even more if you go straight for the straight line speed setups. That kind of stuff only ever really exists in fairy tales. For these drivers, they're having to find what is, yes, a very low aero setup and the lowest we'll see all season, but one that balances things out, because the corners here, though they can be higher speed when we get down to, say, for example, out here through the exit of turn 7 at Lesmo 2, down this straight, which is a slight left-hand kink on our way to a very fast section of the track here, as we'll watch on board with VSR Chris. 10 minutes left to go in qualifying, by the way, here at the Variante Ascari. They'll still have to find that common ground, even though they're running significantly less aero on these machines. Trying a min-max here between both maneuverability and all 11 corners, which are of varying geometry. You can't necessarily predict which corners are going to be better than others for these cars. It's really gunning it by eye for a lot of these drivers today. And then, of course, the main adage here, the back straight that we just came out of on our way to the Curva Parabolica, and then here, more namely, the opening straight between Parabolica and the Variante Rettifilo down at turns 1 and 2. Now, this is where we were clocking those times in, and this is where I predict we can see the bulk of our overtakes take place. And, of course, everyone does fear that imminent lap 1, turn 1 failure that I wouldn't say we're out of the woods on seeing today here, with around 18 cars in attendance, potentially more on the way in the next 9 minutes. We cut away from VSR Chris. Let's get a look on our timing charts here as we quickly watch on board with Tyler Vermaak. He crosses the line then from 4th position to, sadly by the looks of it, not see an improvement after this lap just gone. Just under 9 minutes left to go, and with the first of our times already in, Just Boris leads the charge ahead of Tommy. Now this is exciting to see, because as we mentioned, Lamborghini was clocking in 172 miles an hour. Porsche was clocking in even less. Audi was clocking in 172, and so was Aston Martin. As a matter of fact, for a day that would have seemingly benefited BMW and Ford, they are sparsely populated. Elite Cassie doesn't appear to be a showing, and the only Ford left in range at the moment is VSR Antion, who seems to be struggling more so with manoeuvrability than getting the car to get the car to grips down the opening and back straights. Sadly, we don't have any data at this time for the solitary Mercedes of GTR Twiglet, and the number 96 currently residing in the pit lane alongside Jayco 14. Soviet Mario out on track as well. He took his first career win. We mistakenly identified that as the first silver win. No, that was Essen Quies, and that was quite some time ago at the Red Bull Ring. But in a history of firsts, then, that last sprint round just gone gave us our first win for this driver here. He's been a seasoned veteran. He's been around the block to see quite a few different champions come up through the ranks to come and have a go. And I think it is quite satisfying then, despite everything that went on down at turn 1 and 2 at Snetterton last week, to see him finally take the top step of the podium. It certainly does add to an interesting list of drivers over the course of this season. We can see, though, one of our closest margins in qualifying as we head past the halfway mark, and now we're down towards among the final minutes here with laps just hovering underneath 2 minutes. Meaning we've got about, I'd say, 4-ish more laps before the end of qualifying on average for a lot of the drivers currently lapping the track. You can see it's an incredibly tight margin, a single hundredth and then 2,000ths between Tommy and Audi Pete. The battle of German manufacturers then for the last of those podium positions, as it's all Italian then up front, courtesy of Lamborghini. Behind the wheel of that 999, as ever, just Boris. It'd be very, very tough to take this kind of qualifying off of him. That Lamborghini is right at home, though it may have the beating heart of an Audi. Everything else therein is all textbook Lamborghini equipment on board there. The Evo 2, of course, their most recent package for the Huracan, and they don't look to be taking that away anytime soon, much like Audi did with the R8. Lamborghini will continue their manufacturer program going up until the Temerario, which is supposed to be making its debut by the end of this year, potentially even the start of next for competition. So then, we're seeing the swan song for the V10 era of Lamborghini, the last we'll ever see of the 5.2 litre. Started off with the Gallardo, and now ends here on a historic final chapter for the Huracan before we move over to the twin-turbo V8 Lamborghini has lined up for the upcoming Temerario GT3. Watching on board with Just Boris, you can see, despite the fact that the Lamborghini is almost notorious on ACC for its stability problems, he is taking this with a very, very loose and fast approach out through the Variante Ascari. He's absolutely pummeling those curbs, and perhaps that's what's giving him the upper hand here. He leads the timing session right now by 0.4 of a second. That is one of the widest margins we've seen from any one car to another. I'd say the only other one there would be, you're looking there, 0.6 of a second between 9th and 10th, VSR Antion and VSR Grizz to round out the top 10 on timing charts. 5.5 minutes left to go. And does he extend the margin? Now, we saw he was capable of a 1:47.2 as he gets across the timing line. Doesn't appear to have updated then, meaning it wasn't an improvement. We're here with Tommy on the exit of the Variante della Roggia. I must say, it's a plucky day to be a Porsche fan. They've got one of the best balance of performance packages coming into today's race. Really, this is in the palm of Tommy's hand here. If he plays his cards right and he sticks religiously to the back end of that Lamborghini, he could potentially see his way up into the lead of this race, as once you're out in front, it's a lot easier for him to try and defend. He's got a very wide back end on that 992. We've seen already Tommy knows a thing or two about defensive performances. We saw the early sprinklings of that all the way back in Season 7 when he wowed expectations with Ferrari. So he knows his way around a defensive performance. Oh my word, as you see there, that's all gone a cropper. That's what the drivers are going to be wondering about and worrying for. There with 4.5 minutes left to go. He's still got an opportunity to strike back here on track. We check in with Tyler Vermack and Audi Pete on their way out of Lesmo 1. I must say, it's looking optimistic for Audi. I mean, their engine right now is what's powering the pole position car. The 999 Lamborghini, same 5.2 litre V10 in there as the one inside this very car here. The last generation Audi R8. And really seeing Audi go all those years back when they discontinued their manufacturer program, and slowly but surely we're seeing the R8 be phased out of mainstream racing, is quite a bittersweet thing, because it was this one very rare opportunity that Audi had since the, I'd say, the Quattro era to properly wow expectations on the world stage. And I think, sadly, we may not see many more opportunities like that, because with Formula 1, for better intents and purposes here, most of that is badge engineering. I mean, they are effectively running Sauber with just a new badge on top there in Formula 1 from 2026 onwards. So you see here, Audi to the line. Where does Audi Pete rank up then? 3.5 minutes left to go. Bear in mind, he only has to find about 12,000ths of a second there for the front row start. He may just wait and bide his time to see how things land after the Variante Rettifilo. As we go barreling down here, ultra late on the brakes by Audi Pete. You can really see he's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. 3 minutes left to go. You can see hot on his trails was VSR Antion. We also saw their new time roll in by Tommy Johansson. He's up to 13th and ahead of Hin Hin Papi in the 777. We did just quickly see their Soviet Mario lay an absolute blindsider in the final minutes of qualifying to put himself second fastest. Splits the gap in half there on what looked like an impenetrable barrier of 0.4 of a second between second and first. Soviets come in and said, well, you know, I managed it last week. I'm going to try again now. And really, that's quite an inspiring thing to see, because despite what the data would have you believe, with McLaren arguably the slowest manufacturer on the grid, it's in the corners where Soviet is making the bulk of his time up. He has built a car almost explicitly for combat here in Monza, and this could very well be the golden recipe in breaking what is an otherwise stonewall defence of pole position by Lamborghini's Just Boris. Number 6 then across the line, that was VSR Otzi. graced our screens for all of half a second there. That goes to show just how fast we're going to be moving around this track in the next 2 minutes' time as we get on towards the start of the race. And obviously race control has been on DEFCON 1 all through today heading into this race. I think any sim racer can tell you, no matter the level of experience, the dread, the eldritch horrors that lie within a start here at Monza. So we see a brand new fastest time then by Just Boris, a 1:47.375, and that is very, very, very solid indeed. New fastest lap then of the session thus far. He's really been adamant to prove a point here, despite the fact that Audi Pete has now clawed the time in necessary to get ahead of Tommy. He's only up to the front of that second row. With the introduction of Soviet Mario, we could see in the next minute and a half then an ultra close field for the start of round 9. Heading then down towards Della Rosia. Out towards the Lesmo. As you can see, it's very, very tough to spot any kind of imperfections in the way that Boris handles that machine around track. He seems to be one of these drivers just perfectly in tune, save for maybe that there. Looked like a little bit of desync, but it's one of those very rare occasions, and I can only really count these kind of drivers on one hand, and he's really not proving my point here, of drivers that have this almost symbiotic control of their vehicle. They're operating as a single entity, a single unit. He never once seems too stressed behind the wheel. And I think this owes not only to an experience standpoint. Boris has been around the block quite a few times in quite a few championships. He's seen the likes of what talent can bring him in the Xbox division of ACC. And it also comes from just mastery of one's craft, mastery of one's machine. He has these cars set up every single event to within a T there. He's loyal to whatever his setup provider is, whether it's himself or whether he's got a team of boffins backing him up there to a fault. Down to the line then to start his last flying lap. He's got 10 seconds against the clock there as he makes the line. Obviously, that wasn't to an improvement. It was a bit of a shakier lap than to be expected. Tommy Johansson, though, takes a disqualification in the 71. That is the end of qualifying today. Just Boris looks to be potentially throwing in the towel. We'll quickly catch on board with VSR Antion. Now Ford, we're looking to have a pretty cheerful day here, and they go up to 7th. So definitely the result he's hunting for. I think he'll be gunning for a top 5. Then number 23 to the line. We'll see where they landed as they just cross now. The number 23. We can find that on our charts. It doesn't appear to be all too obvious where they are. Wishful Winnings there into 6th position. Only other drivers left on track, 999, number 66 and number 6. We'll get on board with the one furthest up the order, and we'll quickly catch on with the number 6 of VSR Otzi as he gets to the line. He actually invalidates after the Varianti Ascari, so we're back on board with Tommy on the way to the checkered flag here for the end of qualifying. Can he lay a dent in what has been a near flawless qualifying performance by Just Boris? Well, with a shaky exit to the Varianti Ascari, it's not looking likely. Boris has already peeled it into the pits here, satisfied with today's qualifying result. We're on board then with Tommy. Qualifying predictions had him placed up towards the front here. Can he deliver on those promises? He only has to find in and around a hundredth, as a matter of fact, of a second. It's all or nothing for the number 66 against Soviet Mario to the line. Sadly, not to an improvement on this very day, but he gave it everything he could there towards the end of qualifying. Bear in mind, Porsche, like McLaren, on the back foot, so to see them on 2nd and 3rd is a remarkable feat indeed. We'll get a look at the total run of the grid in a moment's time then at the end of today's qualifying session. Before we get onto the grid though, let's quickly take a look at the 3 pieces of news we have to share with you today, and the first of which was in Formula E news, as the FIA is set to reveal Gen 4 of the Formula E platform very, very soon, with significant boosts to performance both in terms of powertrain and in terms of aerodynamics. It looks to be moving swiftly away from the more triagonal era of the Gen 3 and Gen 3 Evo, looking to boast nearly double the amount of horsepower. In our second bit of news, in the World Endurance Championship, Aston Martin, following on the trail of Porsche's announcement of a road-going version of the 963, announced they won't be doing road-going versions of the Valkyrie LM. As a matter of fact, they'll produce 10 track-only variants for discerning customers and selling them in a full competition spec package, along with a crew that will follow you to any track in the world to assist you on your track day endeavours, much like the Ferrari FXX programme. And then our last bit of news is one that is quite bittersweet. In Formula 1 news, it came out with the reveal of the 2026 Formula 1 World Championship calendar that the historic Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, formerly the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, has been axed from Formula 1. In its place is the Grand Prix de España, the Spanish Grand Prix, held at the newly created Madrid in Madrid, Spain. Well, that's the end of our news segment as we get on towards the starting grid for round 9 of the championship. Leading us from pole position is Just Boris on a rather predictable performance here on his home race for his car, the 999 Lamborghini, heading up the pack here in the home of Italian motorsports. Soviet Mario then makes a very, very likely bid for the lead of this race here. Starting in second, he'll be in the slipstream of that Lamborghini, could stage a claim up towards the lead. He's in the closest possible position to do so on a lightning qualifying session. Then right behind him, following on the same tradition there, is Tommy with an absolute blinder, putting himself in third. McLaren and Porsche, may I add as well, were on data at least the slowest manufacturers to participate, yet have made one of the most remarkable appearances on the grid alongside Lamborghini, who is dead centre of the alignment charts for that. Right behind them then, Audi Pete in 4th and VSR Oatseed to round out the top 5. Wishful Winnings in 6th with Tyler Vermack, the furthest up the order for Aston Martin in 7th position. VSR Antion, who was looking to be in a very strong stead with with Ford, is starting from 8th position. And VSR Chris in 9th with Aston Martin. Rounding out our top 10 then, VSR Funky Fish are one of 3 Porsches in this race. Seems to spread themselves out rather nicely. 3rd, 10th and 16th. More on that in a moment's time. VSR Grizz starts in 11th position ahead of Abok and Hin Hin Papi in 12th and 13th. VSR Smiler in 14th position ahead of Shawnee Mack on a fairly solid qualifying performance, but that comes on a wave of qualifying suspensions with Jayco 14, GTR Twiglet and Tommy Johansson all taking sabbaticals for today's qualifying session, so it appears. We can definitely say so for the ones at the back of the row. I think Jayco may have laid a time in by the end of today's session. We did certainly see him on track in the lead up to today's qualifying. With about a minute left to go, it's going to be a very interesting race. Now, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but coming back to the argument of straight line speed, neither of our top 4 competitors have anything close. As a matter of fact, you want to take a look out towards our top 6, have anything close to an advantage in terms of straight line speed. All of them were hitting between turns 11 and 1 in and around the 172 mile an hour mark. For those of you in Europe, that's 277 kilometers per hour. The closest you'll get for a straight line speed advantage is coming courtesy of VSR Antion, starting down in 8th position. Tyler Vermack alongside him there is also in a bit of an average position. The V8 Vantage clocked in 172 as well. The only one with a straight line speed advantage starts from 8th position on track. So the last thing you're going to want to see in today's race is that bright pink number 1 Ford Mustang heading up the rear. So we'll be getting on board with Just Boris to take us away then on today's formation lap. And is this lining up to be win number 4 for Just Boris? Well, he's got an hour of racing ahead of him to try and make true on these promises, and it is going to be a very, very tough field of competition. We've already got drivers defying the odds here for overall race pace, and when we go barreling 18 cars in all, 9 either side of it down towards the Variante Rettifilo, one will be crossing their fingers for no major incidents. It is a very, very tall order, no matter the skill bracket, so it seems a very tall order to get all drivers through turns 1 and 2 in a clean and safe manner. So a lot of these drivers are going to be bracing for impact. There's a very high, tense environment heading down into turn 1. You can see just sizing up the width of the corner there. A little bit cheeky by Just Boris, because he's already trying to get a feel for the track when he's having to try and take slightly out of the way lines. He's obviously had a look at the optimal line there, but gauging the width of the corner just to see if anyone does try to be a hero on their way down towards turn 1, they'll have a plan. Down through the Curva Grande, then turn 3. This is going to be a mighty impressive story today then. Lamborghini looking for a win at home. McLaren and Porsche looking to give them a very, very good run for their money there. It was only by about 0.3 of a second that these two were divided on qualifying trim. Now we have to bear in mind, obviously, the presence of strategy for this race. Unlike the sprint rounds we saw last week, no imminent. There is no open sort of strategy model at the moment. There is an imminent proceeding for a one-stop pit strategy there. Lost for words. On our way down through Lesmo. One mandated pit stop on the charts for today. That includes fuel and tyres for these drivers. So, and with temperatures at a scorchingly high 27 and 30. That's 27 ambient. That's already quite hot. And then 30 on track. Tyre degradation is going to be an imminent fear for a lot of these drivers, especially our top three, whose cars are not exactly the best known for tyre degradation. I'd say your first advantage is coming from wishful winnings there. You can see in the blue and yellow Ferrari. That is pound for pound one of the best cars for tyre degradation on the current ACC meta. For a lot of those drivers inside the top three, it is going to be a battle more so against the Pirellis than it is with each other, though they're not going to hesitate at the option to do both. Now on the way down towards the Variante Ascari. Now we saw what can go wrong flat out through this section of the track, so just like the fears they'll be having on their way down towards the Variante Rettifilo will be shared in almost equal endeavour down through this section of the track. Just as easy for things to go pear-shaped here as it is down at turn 1. And the difference being with this, you don't need another driver to contribute to that. Momentum conservation is the name of the game for these drivers. Even though they've got incredibly powerful engines here, north of 500 horsepower, they'll definitely keep them well and above 130, 140 miles an hour for the majority of today's race. Every ounce counts here with BOP in play. I'd say one of the drivers that could be having one of the more opportunistic chances of today's race lead would be the Porsche, starting from third. Of course, with that balance of performance package weighing quite heavily, no pun intended, in the direction of benefiting exclusively Porsche. With Lexus no longer showing in the championship, it could be a very lucky day on the horizon for Tommy, but only time will tell as we get down out through turn 11. And the Curva Parabolica gives rise to, looking at it here, 9 cars either side of it, 18 cars in total for round 9 of Season 8 of VSR Phoenix here at the Temple of Speed, the Autodromo Nazionale di Monza, here in a very sunny Monza, Italy. We are but mere moments away from going lights out here in Monza. Pray for these drivers here because it's bedlam from here on out. Without further ado then, for round 9 of the championship, we're into the second half proper here in VSR Phoenix Season 8. Without further ado, we're green and racing here in Monza for the first time of the season, and already you can see what a great start that third place has had. Tommy trying to get side by side with Soviet Mario, who's out in clean open air, but Tommy's right tunneled in there on the slipstream of Just Boris on our way down towards the Variante Rettifilo. Tommy up to second. Boris still leads though down into turn 1. Otzi on the inside of Audi Pete there, trying for his chances at P4. Gets squeezed out though after the exit of the Variante Rettifilo. Meanwhile, down the order you can see things already getting a bit argy-bargy between our drivers there, but nothing major by the looks of it. A few drivers off at the gravel there, but nothing too critical. So we've got 80% of the race out of the way just by getting through the Variante Rettifilo, but now comes the second challenge, the Variante della Roggia. Very easy for one to overpin their brakes on their way down towards this section of the track, and right now you can see the biggest issue is just kicking up dust in the face of your adversaries. Right now, all drivers appear to be through then with very little problems. VSR Chris and VSR Abok side by side to the Lesmos for the first time here, already a minute into the race. And they're still keeping that momentum rolling on their way down towards Lesmo too. Funky Fish surfing past Antion to get up to the rear quarter of VSR Abok. That is incredible stuff for the race start then. We'll stay on board for a moment's time here with VSR Chris on his battle right now, functionally to hold off 9th position. You can see he's got an absolute swarm of drivers on his rear. On our way down towards the Variante Ascari. Behind him is the battle for 10th between Funky Fish and Abok. Abok takes the runoff at Ascari. That invites the Porsche through. So playing his chances very close to his chest there. Funky Fish rewarded with top 10. After the first lap, he's played that very, very close. Getting a quick look here further up the order inside the top 10. We can see though there are battles in the background and up ahead of us that we'll be getting on board with in a moment's time. Namely, that battle for second place right now on board with Tommy, who is incredibly vulnerable there after Just Boris gets away and then some after an astonishing first lap there. He's 1.6 seconds up the road. Soviet Mario is side by side with our number 66 on our way down towards the Variante Rettifilo. That's the same story right behind them between Pete and Otzi, and cutting the chicane as bedlam erupts here at Monza. What on earth went on down at turn 1 and 2? Soviet now up into the lead of the battle for second, I should say. Boris still leading the race overall, of course. You can see in that fight going on behind them, it was a story of 3 different pairs, with plenty of drivers having to take the emergency runoff. Among them was Tyler Vermack and Audi Pete. You can see Desync creeping in a little bit there from Soviet Mario now that he's up into second place, battling further down inside the top 10. Let's get a quick look on board then with the rest of our field. You can see Funky Fish was a story we were covering earlier on as he was side by side with Antion for a little while there. We were going to cover that battle, but it seems to have resolved itself in the time we've been away. He's up into 10th, Antion down in 11th. Looking here, Wishful Winnings is eyeing up a very, very lofty lunge up to 4th position. He's got 3 cars ahead of him there. You can see all running in a line, and that being, Audi Pete, VSR Otzi, and Tyler Vermack. You can see just how close things are getting. Vermack and Otzi side by side. They're just pressing each other out of Ascari, and that's going to give rise here for a very exciting move by Wishful Winnings in the fight for what is functionally 4th position. Right now, though, we're looking at what is closer, let's say, to the fight of realistically 6th position between Vermack and Wishful. You can see the Aston Martin tucked into the slipstream on the McLaren and the Audi ahead. Let's say realistically, this is definitely now the fight for 4th position. We'll stay on board then with Wishful Winnings on his 3rd race in the gold standings. Oh my word! It's all erupted down the opening straight. Oh my god! That is a monstrous incident there. Let's get a look on the replays, as it was a slight tap that created this domino effect. Now, this was between Vermack and Audi Pete. We were watching on with Wishful Winnings. You can see there he was squeezed to the left-hand side of the track. The Audi just gets tapped, then clatters into the McLaren and then into the Aston, sending all 3 of them into a dead spiral. We can see in the background, I think VSR Grizz may have got caught up in that one as well. That was cataclysmic down the opening straight. For Wishful Winnings, though, he's been able to surf the bedlam of what on earth went on down the opening straight to give himself a very beneficial P4 up ahead of VSR Funky Fish, as we can see an absolute wave of drivers in trouble. Among them, VSR Otzi, VSR Smiler and Tommy Johansson. We also saw as well amongst that field with Tyler Vermack and Audi Pete. We'll try and catch on board with them. VSR Grizz definitely did get caught up there, but doesn't appear to have anything warranting an immediately trip to the pit lane there. The number 96, though, in trouble. Yellow flags are out, and that's for GTR Twiglet in the Mercedes, facing the wrong way on track. Shawnee Mack, I should say, is now up to 9th position, so that is remarkable stuff. Yellow flags have cleared. Smiler asking, where did that car come from? We'll get a look at that on the replay again. Right now we can see where things stand after the first 5 minutes of racing. It's Boris from Soviet from Tommy. Wishful 4th. Funky Fish into the top 5. That was, to say the least, a real blink and you'll miss it moment. That was absolutely bizarre. A racing incident, no less. We'll get a look at it here as we quickly just check in to see where VSR Grizz and VSR Chris are on their way out of Parabolica. Looking on that replay again. Now, this was the incident that happened a few laps before. We were watching from Wishful Winnings' perspective in P7. This was functionally in a 4-way fight for P4. You can see it was a tap by the Aston, then clatters both the McLaren and the Aston, and they go into a dead spiral. That is uncontrollable. They're on the brakes, and there's just nothing they could have done in that moment. And that's all really come apart for them at the seams, and that's, I'd say, functionally brought about a very early end to most of their races here. We're already down a driver here in today's race. We wanted to catch on board then. You can see some of the victims of this one. Tyler Vermack, who was squeezed to that left-hand side of the track, is still on the field, but in what looks to be a critically damaged Aston Martin there. You see, it's not looking particularly hopeful for Vermack to come back to a substantial finish in today's race. With the damages, he is no doubt going to be spending the next 10 or so minutes being forced to repair. Looking around the field, though, to see where the remaining victims are. Now, we're looking to try and find, Otzi. We can see they're in the pit lane already. And then also trying to find Audi Pete, who I believe may have retired from this session. Not 100% sure on that. We'll get an update in about 3 minutes' time. We can see, though, side by side, and now up in a second goes Tommy, up ahead of Soviet. And was that tactical then by the McLaren? Let's quickly catch on board with Soviet Mario, who's now down a 3rd. If we take a look here, what is the tacticianry going on in the court of McLaren here? This is the fight for 2nd. I think this was all a little bit premeditated by Soviet. He's let him get past him down the back straight between Ascari and Parabolica, and now he's got the longest stretch of track. But little does he know, that McLaren, pound for pound, actually struggles more for straight line speed. So this gamble of his, whether or not he was expecting to make it stick, has just simply gone south for him. He's put all of his cash on red and it's come up black. So that is a bit of a failed gamble there by Soviet Mario. Nonetheless, he'll stay on the tail of Tommy past the Variante Rettifilo, now through the Curva Grande. 52 minutes left to go then. And what an interesting start to today's race we have had. Monza doesn't disappoint when it comes to big incidents, but I was expecting and had a lot of my money on the incident down at Rettifilo. That was only minor in comparison to what utter mayhem occurred on the way between turn 11 and turn 1. The sole survivor you can see there in the background is Wishful Winnings. It was an onlooker to the horrors that occurred up there in that three-man clash. But he's been the biggest winner of that one. He was fighting for fourth, and now he's got fourth. And with it comes an Iron Vice control of fourth there, because he's quite a ways up from the car in fifth, or I'd definitely say is looking at a driver of the day here. Because VSR Funky Fish has really played his cards close to the chest and has benefited massively from the mistakes around him. He's kept himself out of trouble, and fair play to him, because he's now up from where we last saw him was inside the top 10, now up into the top 5. Exponential progress by the 982. He keeps that ball rolling. It's not going to be a too far-sighted assumption to say that he could be battling for a podium by the end of today's race, if that is to track. Right now, though, we're still watching the fight for second between Soviet Mario and Tommy. We saw the last time these two were side by side was the lap before, just on the straight just gone before Parabolica, in which Soviet rolled over and let Tommy get him past. Now, is this a little bit of collaboration between the two here? They know the gap is only getting larger and larger at the time between themselves and the leading Lamborghini of Just Boris. We see Otzi has made a return to the field there after that incident. He returns in 16th of this race. Functionally last, but it's an achievement after an incident like that to have re-emerged onto the track to continue racing to the checkered flag. Right now, still watching with that fight for second. And that Porsche has really got some to give in comparison to McLaren. McLaren has been one of the more dominant manufacturers of the day. Balance of performance, like we said, heavily sways in the direction of benefiting Porsche today. As a matter of fact, we're going to look at that again, the balance of performance for today. Porsche losing 29 kilos whilst McLaren gained 5. So by court of technicality alone, it's going to be benefiting Tommy for the majority of this race. It's going to take some cunning tactics here and good strategy by Soviet Mario to get himself up and ahead of Tommy now after that move. Did see a momentary white flag appear after Rettifilo. That was for the number 4 of Shawnee Mack in 12th position, but that's since cleared. Out through Ascari here. It's getting closer and closer, and oh my word, again another massive incident. This time down at Ascari. We only saw a few angles of that, but that is cataclysmic for the Porsche of the number 66. Tommy could be out of this race after that. As you can see, gets up onto the second part of Ascari thereabouts. Then a massive snap in the opposite direction. Fortunately, Soviet was spared from the wrath of the approaching Porsche. As you see, it made a very brief visit to the armed coat barriers on the inside of Ascari. That is another cataclysmic incident there. And you see right about there, snaps over the second part of Ascari. And you can see he's on his way to the wall. I would be genuinely surprised right now if he is still on that track. The number 66, yes, in the pit lane now. So for Wishful Winnings, it's really been wishful winning. I mean, he's just stood there and won every single time right now. And on this track, he's probably going to end up finishing in first. Right now, though, this is the one in first, and after a very dominant start in the opening quarter hour, Just Boris leads the fray by a whopping 6.1 second margin to Soviet Mario, who he clashed heads with last week in Snetterton. Fortunately, he's got a little bit of breathing space this time around, unlike what we saw back at turn 1. Looking around the field, Grizz catching up to a three-man battle for fourth. We're going to get on board with the car slap bang in the middle. It's Antion in the number 1 Ford Mustang. Let's see if we can catch on board with them here as we make our way out of Lesmo 1. Up the road as well, we can see the lapped car there re-emerging to the track. Tyler Vermack in the 835 doesn't emerge last after that incident, which is a miracle for him after the damage that we saw on the 835 rolling into the pit lane only a few minutes ago. We're watching right now for the fight of 4th position on board with VSR Antion and VSR Funky Fish. It seems we don't get a mirror match of the incident that went on between Soviet and Tommy, but you can see it is incredibly close, nail-bitingly so, between Porsche and Ford. We know straight line speed. They've got about 3 miles an hour extra on that Porsche in the 7th generation Mustang. Down towards turn 11 though. Funky Fish has got him on the brakes. Down through Parabolica. All of this, by the way, is inviting in the imminent presence of Aston Martin's VSR Chris. And VSR Grizz not too far away from them with Audi. You can see it is just pushing all the way down the opening straight. Antion's going to have to try around the outside here. They've made their decisions. They've played their cards. Let's see who wins on their way down towards Retafilo. As you can see subsiding there to give him the position was VSR Funky Fish. Antion up to 4th. Chris eyeing up ever closer in this fight. Was that the right choice then by Funky Fish? He knows pound for pound he can get that Ford pinned in the braking zones. But I think after getting out in front, it seems that his chances to reclaim 4th are slipping fast. But you can see a very heroic lunge to put himself ever closer. He's not going to let the Ford get away with absolute ransom today. But I think Funky Fish's fight may now be with Chris behind him. We'll catch on with them and as we enter the Lesmo curves. See Grizz as an onlooker to this at the moment. We're trying to get on board. We're, let's say, the attacking car for this one. We're on board with VSR Chris in his fight for 5th position. The Aston Martin did fall away there after Lesmo 2. He may be stuck in a little bit of a dead heat here, whether or not he has to try and defend 6th position or fight for 5th ahead. That is the real question. Now, heading down into this section of the track, we know Porsche is struggling at Ascari. We know Aston Martin doesn't appear to be. So on the exit of Ascari there, like clockwork, the Aston is drawing distance in. Audi staying right where they are, about half a second there away from him in 7th position. And this is where the Porsche starts to falter a little bit out in that clean open air. Oh, it's very close. And there was, yes, a push out of Parabolica. You can see there Chris letting Funky Fish get back on the track. That's good sportsmanship there, owning up to one's mistake. He wants to get the move done in properly and with good form. But the one who's really benefited from all of that is Grizz. He's now up into a very, very easy 5th position. Now what you are looking at is the fight for 6th. We'll stay on board with these two then on their way down to Retafilo. So after the quarter-hour mark then we get a look at our current standings, and after a very chaotic opening quarter hour here in round 9 of the championship, Jos Boris leads by 6.5 seconds to Soviet Mario. Wishful Winnings now promoted to a podium position in 3rd ahead of VSR Antion, who we saw make the move up on Funky Fish, who now falls in behind Grizz, and Chris right behind him at the moment, all towards the back of that top 10. Then further down the line as well, we've got VSR Abok in 8th position, not too far away from him and looking to potentially fight for position very, very soon. We still see here, though, with Chris fighting with Funky Fish on the exit of Lesmo 2. Now on their way to Ascari, things could heat up whilst we read the standings so far. Hin Pappy is closing the gap to Abok, so a fight for 8th could be on our hands very, very soon. Jaco 14 then in 10th position, Shawnee Mack 11th. Tommy having taken a pit stop already after that incident at Ascari here, where Chris looks to get the upper hand. So is the Achilles heel of the Porsche team at the moment Varianti Ascari, with Aston Martin bouncing over the exit there? Maybe not so, as it could still be. Yes, as a matter of fact, regain of position by Funky Fish, back up to 6th then, with Chris having to play second fiddle on his way down towards the Curva Parabolica at turn 11. Another late dive on the brakes there. How many times does he want to risk this over the course of this race? We've seen already that on paper, Aston Martin cannot outbrake Porsche on any of these corners. And I think both of these two are acutely aware of the advantage Porsche has. So Chris is having to try and get him any which way necessary. It looks to be right now a slipstream game once again between Aston and Porsche. Now on their way down towards turn 1. Much, much later on the brakes. Gung-ho attitude there by VSR. Chris runs a little bit wider into turn 1. Snips things back up nicely come turn 2. That's a very, very textbook example there of a late lunge overtake. He stayed, well, maybe not a late lunge overtake, but a very solid overtake to say the least. He gave that absolutely 110%, but he's not out of the woods just yet, still having a fight for 6th position, which he now holds on to. Now you can see Funky Fish is really getting elbows out. Chris having to cut Della Rosia for the 2nd time today in this race. You see Funky Fish is not giving any quarter to that Aston Martin. Later on the brakes into Lesmo, very nearly contact between the pair of them, having to hold the outside line. A bit of a snap by VSR. Chris very nearly rejoins the track directly over the nose of Funky Fish, who then pulls the brakes a little bit earlier there, trying not to snip across the back end of the Aston Martin. It's, I must say, very impressive stuff between the pair of them, that they are able to race in such close proximity with such due regard for each other there on track. Very, very good sportsmanship from the word go between the pair of them, save for that one incident at Parabolica, which we already saw, a rather gentlemanly gesture by the Aston Martin to let the Porsche get back on by, owing up to his mistakes there. Ultimately, that's giving Grizz the position both of them were fighting for in the first place, but they're not going to spare on the chances to have a very solid battle down for 6th. And that looks to be wrapped up for the time being, though, between the pair of them. So let's get on board with the next couple of battles set to emerge here on track. And we were seeing the proceedings for a fight for 8th position. Hin Papi now up the road by about 1.5, make it 2 seconds between himself and VSR Abok, the two Ferraris towards the back of the top 10, looking to fight with Jayco 14 heading up the rear. We see here VSR Smiler leaving the pit lane, having completed their first and current only mandatory pit stop. And bear in mind, a few drivers have already had to do that for emergency purposes. Say for the example of Tyler Vermack in the gold category at the moment. He was caught up in that major incident not too long ago involving himself, Audi Pete, VSR Otzi, as well as, trying to remember here, Wishful Winnings, who managed to get out scot-free on that. He was an observer mostly to it, but very, very nearly could have been a casualty among them. You can see right now that the difference of survival has played a massive, massive token to his performance today. Wishful Winnings was able to sort of thread the eye of a needle there during that incident. He holds 3rd. Vermack, who wasn't so lucky, holds on to 14th. After his incident then and his first mandatory pit stop, Tommy rejoins the track currently in 12th position and nearly a minute down the road from Shawnee Mack. You can see heading up the rear of him right now as we enter Curva Parabolica is the race leader, so it shows to what end that these detrimental incidents are having on their performance today. It also owes a token to just how fast our drivers are honing this track, as even for a standard pit stop there, I think for Tommy it was a little bit of repairs as well as new tyres. He's nearly a lap down the road. Funky Fish, we saw in the battle previous, now 1.5 seconds away from Chris. Now that he's out in the open air, the Porsche is struggling out of the slipstreams. Speaking of Porsche, here's Jayco 14. Now we wanted to get a look in on the fight going on ahead of him between, at the moment, VSR Abok and Hin Papi. We can also see Tommy Johansson there in the number 71 Aston, the black and green, currently caught as a bystander to that fight. We can also see as well that Otzi keeping Wishful Winnings company as the two involved in that 4-car incident. Wishful Winnings got off very, very lightly, to say the least, being able to keep himself just out of the range of fire to thread the needle on that fight. He was our eye on track to see how that unfolded. Personally, looking back onto that incident, I'd say from my point of view, from the point of view our drivers saw as well, I think courtesy of Wishful, that was a fantastic view to have watched this incident unfold from. That just, to me, looked a little bit like a racing incident. You could see that the Audi was drifting across the nose of the Aston was squeezed all the way to the grass on the left-hand side of the track. If you were going to go at a blame game here, the Audi did drift across the nose, and I would say that is what spawned the issue in the first place, because he obviously clattered into the McLaren, he then clattered into the Aston, and it sent all 3 of them into a whole lot of trouble. If that's the bulk of what our issues are going to be today, then I'd say we've got off lightly here in Monza. I've seen even worse play out, and even worse still can play out with 38 minutes left to go. We're heading, though, quite swiftly towards our actual mandatory pit stop strategy window, anywhere between 38 and 22 minutes here in Monza. But do keep a very, very close eye on that. Soviet Mario there in second. It has started to filter out there after the bulk of our action has played out as an endurance racing circuit, as well as obviously the home of the Italian Grand Prix. Monza does play quite a solid set piece for an endurance track, and it does become a game of strategy here as the drivers just sort of knuckle down, get into a rhythm and keep themselves out of trouble around the halfway mark for what is... Oh no, that looks like even more trouble for Tyler Vermack. We didn't exactly see what happened to the 835. But that's even more damage. In fact, returning to the pits, much like how he did the last time, with the front of the car hanging on by a couple zip ties there. It's not looking pretty for Aston Martin. So Monza, most likely, I would say, where that incident probably unfolded. We watch here with Jayco 14. You can see Tommy Johansson getting elbows out to unlap himself from Abbott. But then tucks back in behind the Ferrari, runs himself wide and takes the emergency exit out for the Variante Rettifilo. Now that could give Jayco the opportunity to come and strike at 9th position, who's now stuck behind the now blue-flagged Aston Martin of Tommy Johansson. He's saying, well, no, as a matter of fact, I had the faster line. I'll be holding on to that position on track. No free tickets for you. See, right now, we're looking at the imminent proceedings for a fight of 9th position. We'll stay on board with Jayco, as this is a very rare opportunity to see what his fighting style is like. Now, we don't see a lot out of Jayco. He tends to hover around the back of the field. It's definitely been payday for him for choosing that Porsche. They were on their best BOP package, same as what we saw out of Tommy not too long before his incident at Ascari. You can see Jayco's been able to pick up the baton for Porsche here in Monza. He's been keeping his head low and out of trouble for the majority of today's race. As we head to the halfway mark, though, he finally may have his own little slice of the fighting for position pie up for grabs here in Monza. For Twiglet in chat asking if it was Pete, yes. It was the Audi was at the epicenter of the major incident down through the opening straight between turns 11 and 1. Whether or not I'd say it's 100% on his fault, that would be up to race control, and frankly, we're not that. We tried to be that at one point on TRTN. As it turns out, gets very, very messy. Very messy indeed. Realistically, it looked more like a racing incident. Just a pretty standard example of that. Stuff happens, drivers get close, eventually rubbing happens. Would I say that that incident constituted the incredible overreaction from the Audi on a very slight tap? No, I would say that's more on the game's fault than the driver's. A tap like that, it could have spawned an issue like that, but from what I saw, it looked like there was a bit more of a bump than what was actually let on. Stay on board with Jayco on his pursuit then of 9th. This is now actually for 8th position on track. As we see drivers now, VSR Funky Fish, a fellow Porsche there, into the pit lane for his first pit stop today. 35 minutes left to go. We'll stay on board with these two for the moment's time. We'll be back in a second. So still on board with Jayco 14 and VSR Abok on their way now down towards the Curva Parabolica at turn 11. You can see right now it's still been hovering in and around that low 1 second high nought, and there you can see Abok going into the pits before Jayco, so that's a free position up for grabs for the number 14. But now strategy is going to play a huge hand on whether or not he holds on to that position by the end of this race. We'll catch up with him later on. Back up to our podium discussion at the moment. Really, it is been quite the wishful day for wishful winnings. I think the name does ring quite true for his performance today. He's kept his head out of trouble. He was very, very fortunate, to say the least, to get himself out of that problem. As for Twiglet in chat, yeah, we did manage to capture that incident. You can actually see the aftermath of it is that Otzi, one of the drivers who was clattered by that incident, it was a 3-man incident, is now down to 14th. Wishful Winnings was able to thread the eye of a needle there and miraculously emerged ahead. And he's been able to take that baton and keep running with it, because he's now up to 3rd after an incident for the number 66 of Tommy out for the Variante Ascari. Got a bit friendly over the curbs. Do we have it in the replays there? As a matter of fact, let's just quickly take a look to see if we do. Yes, this was the incident regarding Tommy that gave Wishful Winnings his bid of the podium. You can see out through the second part of Ascari there, over the curbs, gets a little too friendly. That, as a matter of fact, let's see if we can just rewind that. Oh, okay. Doesn't like when I it does not like being interfered with. Wow. I'm going to crash OBS if I keep messing around with it like that. But you can see that black and yellow curb there, just to his left-hand side, is what created all of that grief in the first place. Wishful Winnings then into the pit lane. He's had a very solid race, and now strategy has crept in on him. 32 minutes left to go. We'll see where he emerges later on. Getting a look on board with some of the other drivers around the track. Fellow Ferrari driver then, Hin Pappy, looks to inherit the place off of Wishful Winnings. He'll go up a position there by nature of staying out on track. Now, we must consider, with the incredible searing heat here in Monza, 30 degrees on track, 27 ambient coming into today's race, that tyre wear, like we mentioned, is at an all-time high for this season thus far. The drivers will still be struggling, despite the fact they'll spend the majority of their times cooling the tyres down on the run down the opening and back straights. All of these corners are not particularly friendly to rubber or any kind of compound whatsoever. And frankly, I'm surprised we've not seen more incidents in regards to overall lateral grip. I'd say the only major issue we've had in regards to grip was actually the loss of it after a shunt there between Otzi Vermaak and Audi Pete. So Antion is up to third then. You can see minor damage on both the sides and the front of that Mustang. So in the last we've seen of him, he's been getting his knuckles bloodied over the course of the opening half of today's race. You can see hugging the inside line at turn 11. That is an indication he'll be coming into the pits. Looking at where he stands in class at the moment, it's not been particularly grand for VSR Antion over the course of the championship. Now, he was the bronze division champion last season. You can see VSR Chris taking a very lofty lunge there into the pits. Very last second stuff. I think he was trying to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works for the car ahead of him. Right now, that's VSR Grizz, number 44. Catch up with. Looking in the silver standings, it's not been particularly grand. It's not been a graceful entry, let's put it, for Antion off the back of his victories in bronze last season. Stop-go 30-second penalty there. First of its kind dished out for Shawnee Mack today on the exit of the pits for a pit lane speeding infraction. He'll be forced to serve that 30 seconds inside the pit lane past the halfway mark of the race. He's not going to be happy with that one, to say the least. And checking in here with Shawnee Mack on his way out of the Variante Rettifilo. Exits the pits behind Tommy Johansson, who he's been fighting for position with over the course of this race. Exits in 13th, and he'll be nowhere near him after his stop-go 30 is in effect by the end of today's race. Looking at it here, we want to see what the story is up front for our leaders. We're back on board with Just Boris now leading this race here in Monza. Heading down out of the curve parabolic, you can see Funky Fish there. He goes potentially around the outside of, could it be some free slipstream up for grabs? He's holding the far left-hand side of the track. He's giving very due regard to Funky Fish. I think he's learned quite quickly the risks of lapped traffic since his debut back in Watkins Glen. You can see that got incredibly close between the pair of them with the introduction of Antion into the mix. Boris, though, just manages to thread the eye of a needle there, and for Funky Fish, he's been very fortunate to hold on to position there, racing Antion all the way down to turns 1 and 2 to hold on to the position on track. Very, very well done, though, between the pair of them. Xavier Mario, though, is into the pits. Number 14 had trouble. That's Jaco 14, as a matter of fact. Had issues on the exit, yes, of the Curva Parabolica, and has opted to stay out on track, even though the entry to the pit lane was right in front of him. So that is definitely quite bizarre for Jaco 14. Not sure what the thought process is. I imagine it's because he's already taken his pit stop. He doesn't want to have to run in and grab a new pair of tyres and potentially risk losing more and more positions, especially with more and more drivers taking their runs to the pit lane. Looking at the midway mark right now of the race, Boris still out on track. Soviet on his way out has obviously lost some positions out in his time in the pit lane. Wishful Winnings is on the horizon to try and snatch third off of him. We'll see how close things get. He's on the way out. I think it's just too far away to say right now. He might be vulnerable by the end of this lap. He's off of the limiters and back onto racing speed on the exit of the pit lane. Wishful Winnings just exiting the Curva Parabolica. So yes, plenty far away to hold on to a podium by the end of today's race. Now is the story of the up front two, as the two of only 3 drivers left to take their pit stops, that being just Boris VSR Grizz, and then down in 14th VSR Otzi in the number 6 McLaren, who was involved in that incident earlier on. Was more a casualty, more so than involved, but there goes Boris. We'll see what the going rates are for Grizz then. With the race leader in the pit lane, VSR Grizz looks to be going long here for tyre choice in the number 44. I must say, it has been a very, very interesting story to cover VSR Grizz's progress over the course of his career here in VSR Phoenix. Of course, we saw him wow expectations back in the bronze category last season. He got an early promotion to silver, and he's been able to run with that ever since. And I'd say you're not far off the assumption that he could be seeing his way to gold. Maybe not on championship form. I mean, we take a look at it here. It's still incredibly close in the silver championship between himself and Otzi. Right now, he's actually to the disadvantage by about 10 points. And with this kind of form today, especially with that incident involving Otzi, he could definitely overtake the lead of the championship. As a matter of fact, we're just trying to look around to see where Otzi is. He's in 14th, yet to have taken their pit stop. So this is definitely going to tip the scales back in favour for Grizz. And I think even regardless of whether or not he does take home the Silver Championship by the end of Season 8, there's definitely that position starting to be formed for him in gold. And we've seen it before where drivers don't necessarily have to go on championship form for promotion. Most of the drivers like to go through that method of it because it seems the most earned and most legit way. But we've seen drivers break their way through categories simply on a nature that they are a little too fast for the category they were originally placed in. And I think we're starting to see, with Grizz maturing more and more in his career in VSR, that he is getting closer and closer to a premier seat. Boris back out on track then with the fastest lap. Now he's really trying to maximise that gap between himself and White Doctor in the championship. And oh, it's all come apart there. Drive-through penalty for VSR Grizz. That is gut-wrenching stuff. But VSR Otzi is a little too far away to take any kind of advantage of that. Grizz may still have the opportunity to lead the Silver Championship after today, but that has all come apart at the seams for him there. He's actually brought things to a bit of an abrupt stop after the exit of Retafilo, and he is just beside himself there. You can see it in the way he's handling that car. Pangs of frustration off of the back of that pit stop. That is a sore sight to see for Grizz. Looking around the field then, Wishful Winnings back onto the podium. I must say, it has been an exceptional performance by him today. He's kept his head low and out of trouble, and he has been rewarded tenfold with that podium. Soviet Mario, I must say, definitely did put on quite a wonderful show. He played his cards right, and he played the right kind of sort of bets here in this race. It is a bit of a gamble coming into a race at Monza as to whether or not you'll come out the other side in one piece and with all 4 wheels still on the car, and he has definitely played it very, very close over the course of today's race. Nearly 40 minutes in then, we're watching what appears to be an emerging 3-way fight for 6th position. Funky Fish leads the charge. We're on board with VSR Antion as he leads the charge for the fight of 7th position. Ahead of him would be the fight for 6th. You can see Tommy is closing the gap down with exceptional speed. Out through Ascari, we'll see, do we even see the suggestion of a repeat incident for him? No, as a matter of fact, things were a little bit more pear-shaped for Antion of the 2 in that fight, but the one who suffered the most out of Ascari appears to be Funky Fish because he's lost quite a bit of the gap he had built over the course of Sector 2. So out and through Sector 3, back into the opening sector as we make our way out of Turn 11. Antion's got that straight line speed on both of these Porsches here. Tommy is going to be clinging to the slipstream generated by that absolute land yacht of a Mark 7 Mustang on its way down the opening straight. Flat 6 versus V8. You can only go in the direction of the Mustang. You see a little bit of a flicker there for disconnect problems. Hopefully that doesn't kick us up the backside. Antion, though, runs it ultra late on the brakes, and that's just, yeah, it's just a sudden misjudgment. He's tried to go very, very long for that. He's going to, more likely than not, yes, you can see let Funky Fish back out in front. Otherwise, there will be words with the stewards. Make no mistake of that. But he doesn't want to let himself roll too far behind because Tommy, you can see, is barely a car's length away. But he's backed off there before the Della Rosia chicane. This is very exciting stuff to see. This has actually now been promoted to the fight of 5th position after pit stops now. Out through Lesmo 1, now to Lesmo 2. It can go any which direction here. You've got three very capable drivers all in en passant here. Tommy gets around the outside on the exit of Lesmo 2. He'll be on the inside for the entry of the Variante Ascari. What is the going rates here for Antion? What does he do in the face of such adversity? He's got a Porsche blocking his route ahead and his route to the left. He's going to have to try something very ambitious if he means to hold on to 6th position, and he does. Later on the brakes than Tommy. Tommy backs out, doesn't try and get squeezed out through Ascari, knowing he has a potential opportunity to strike back, but he has to catch the car as it very nearly tipped asunder on the exit of Ascari for the second time in his race today. Antion practically pushing Funky Fish to turn 11. The number 982 trying to make itself as wide as possible. That's very good defending etiquette there. He knows exactly how to use the width of the car, but it's all come asunder there. Porsche really starting to show the cracks as one Porsche falters, another rises as Tommy replaces Funky Fish's position on track. Antion now up against a full frontal assault. Blitzkrieg offensive by Porsche for 5th position. Tommy has a real opportunity to make things stick down into turn 1, but Antion's been very, very ambitious on the brakes thus far, but not this time around. The single crack in the veneer of his defence has been absolutely exploited tooth and nail by that move there by Tommy. Very, very well done and very, very brave indeed. Gave due regard to the safety of the Ford. You can see it's snipped a lot of its momentum. It's clipped its wings, as you could say, and out through the Curva Grande. One Porsche's already up ahead of him. Another could do the same. Funky Fish to the inside at Della Roggia. One chicane gave one Porsche a position. Now 2 chicanes will do the same. Oh, but never mind. A big slide around. Contact between the pair. Oh, no, no, no. It all just keeps coming apart, doesn't it? It's textbook now at Monza. We get to the pinnacle of these moves, and you can see, I think it was just out parking it there on the apex of the second. I don't know. Oh, yeah, no. All right, so looking on the replay here, we watch the run back of it again. Out through the Curva Grande, and then to Della Roggia. I think so. Looking at it there, as he gets to the second part of Della Roggia, that's oversteer, and then he slams on the brakes. You can see because the wheels slow down, and then the Ford with nowhere to go because he doesn't have enough time to react, ends up clattering with the back end of it. So that is mighty unfortunate, to say the least, but I wouldn't say, by the look of what I saw, it didn't look like a premeditated move there. It didn't look like intentional. He was going to just force his way around him. That was a racing incident. Spurred on by sudden oversteer. I mean, Porsche has had their back up against the wall there. Tommy, though, I must say, has had a miraculous comeback drive up to 5th. He's 8.5 seconds away from Chris at the moment. We could even see a bit of a sparring match between these two in the next 20 minutes for 4th position, as he's really making that time back up in droves. This is one of the best things about watching Tommy's performance since his move over to Porsche. Even though, yes, this is a car that will kick you off like an angry Bronco when it so chooses, in the right moments, in the right conditions, and in the right hands, such as the one of the number 66 of Tommy, this car can flow like mercury around these corners. It is one of the best machines to watch pound for pound around these tracks, but it takes a serious bit of guts to control. And you've seen both sides of it, where it can go incredibly catastrophically wrong for Porsche. It can also go incredibly right, and that's what we're seeing in equal regards out of Tommy's performance today. Apologies for the interruption. We're still on board with Tommy then. Now out of the exit of the Curva Grande, back down towards Della Rosa, where we saw an incident for the Porsche earlier on of Funky Fish in his fight against Antion. So looking at where things are, nearly 3/4 of an hour into today's race, I must say it has been a different chapter in each 15-minute instalment. I must say, bite-sized fun and action here in Monza. My mind's still obviously set on the fact of the heartbreaking news Imola is off the calendar for 2026. I could go at length about my opinion on that, but frankly, we haven't got all day. We've got 17 minutes, as a matter of fact, before the end of today's race here in Monza. So, looking at the overall standings with 17 minutes left to go, nearly 3/4 of an hour into round 9 of the championship, Boris still leading on what looks to be the cusp of his 4th win this season, and he's been hunting down trophies here, collecting them like Pokemon in this championship, and he's taking no prisoner in today's example of racing, as he has been utterly dominant behind the wheel of that Lamborghini, the only one of its kind on this field at the moment, and looking to win at home here in Italy. Soviet Mario then in second with McLaren. Wishful Winnings in third to give us an Italian 1 and 3 for manufacturers. Wishful Winnings looking to take home a very resounding podium position, keeping his head low and out of trouble. He has been rewarded with a fantastic result today, owing to his consistency and credibility as a driver there. Fantastic performance by him. VSR Chris also looking to gain some serious points in the championship standings after today's result, 4th position. And then Tommy, who we saw ran into trouble over the Variante Ascari, has made an absolute Leviathan return to form. He's up into the top 5 there. He's been taking no prisoners, and he's hunting down Chris here. He's got 16 minutes before he's in closing range to the Aston Martin in 4th position. Further down the line then, we can see in the background of him is the bright pink #1 Mustang of VSR Antion. He's found himself in an ample bunch of fights today, but he's in 6th position as we draw on the final 15 minutes of today's race. VSR Funky Fish we saw in that incident down at the upcoming chicane here. Della Rosa alongside Antion now makes 7th position. Hin Papi in 8th with Grizz in 9th. Abok in 10th position. Jaco 14 in 11th. Tommy Johansson in 12th. Shawnee Mack in 13th. Tyler Vermack, after his second repaired pit stop, finds himself down in 14th position, and you can see even more damage looking to creep in on the 835 Aston Martin. VSR Smiler in 15th and VSR Otzi down in 16th position. On thoughts of what could have been today, is going to make a huge dent in his performance in silver, especially up against Grizz, who's in 9th at the moment, and his contemporary there in the Silver Championship. Having a look at that once more, you can see there was only a 10-point gap between the pair of them. He will lose out massively when we head to Paul Ricard later this season as well. We see our calendar in the second half here. We're at Monza today on June 11th. Next week we'll be at Paul Ricard, then to the Circuit Ricardo Tormo, sometimes also called Valencia for the last of our sprint rounds, then Barcelona, then Kyle Army. We're drawing on the final weeks of competition then in Season 8, and this has been quite an interesting chapter to say the least. We'll check around the track then to see where our nearest fights could be coming from. As mentioned before, owing to its credible use as a endurance racing track, Monza ends up creating these microcosms of endurance racing where strategy and tyre choice has massively impacted where people stand on track, and also just simply the nature of keeping yourself out of the Armco barriers. You see here for Hin Papi, minor damage on that Ferrari, but he's kept things relatively clean in the 777 and pick up 8th position right now. Nothing too close though, and I think that's one of the things we tend to miss out on in Monza, especially when you subtract the total number of cars, you do end up in these situations where the drivers are a long way ahead or behind one another. You end up missing out on a lot of the action that makes races like this in Season 8 so fantastic to watch. We saw a bit of theatrics there whilst we were saying that over the Variante Ascari. Bit of a jump drift by Soviet Mario, a bit of the Ibisu style driving in the number 26. There's the leading car, just Boris 999 making his way down past the checkered line there to start lap 25 of racing here in Monza. Now we do have a yellow flag out, it's for the 982 at the same corner again, so it strikes back for the second time for Funky Fish. This is his second incident down at Della Rosa. Now that yellow flag has cleared, he's been moved back into the pit lane, and there Funky Fish is out of today's race. That is really quite heartbreaking to see. He had a very solid race, and it's all just come apart again at Della Rosa. Not entirely sure what happened or with whom, but it seems that that corner is rather cursed for the Porsches of today. Speaking of Porsches, Jaco 14 there being hunted down by the race leader. Looking to lap the car currently in 10th position. The number 14 Porsche picking up more and more points here at the chagrin of his fellow drivers. Seems here that the next 12 minutes and 45 seconds will be primarily focused on just survival now, less so than the opportunity to fight with one another, as that seems to be a hope scattered really only amongst the top 10 right now. Sadly, we've not an awful lot to talk about. That's kind of what the going rates are right now. So if we just quickly draw away the timer, let's recount the overall championship standings right now. And as we mentioned, it's an 87-point gap between White Doctor and Just Boris. With White Doctor not participating in today's race, that gap will be cut down significantly by up to 51 points today. Blue Frog's in third, only 10 points away from Boris to make third overall in the championship. Chris MCK in fourth, also a no-show for today's round, will be losing positions, with Tyler Vermack in fifth, not too far away at all, though definitely not picking up as many points as he'd like today. Elite Cassie, also a no-show from sixth position, 222 points, will lose out massively, potentially looking to drop behind 2 more positions to both Soviet Mario and Tommy in 7th and 8th position. Wishful Winnings will definitely be moving up the championship order in 9th position currently with 193 points, and then rounding out our top 10 ETE Giles, who looks to be losing out to the cars behind him by the end of today's race. 11.5 minutes then left to go. We're on board at the moment with Shawnee Mack in the number 4. It has been an interesting story then to cover his progress. He made his debut at Watkins Glen, was involved in a bit of a controversial opening incident with Just Boris when he was lapped traffic down through turns 1, 2, 3 and 4 in the opening sector at Watkins Glen on their way up towards the back straight towards the inner loop. But he has made significant progress in his time here at VSR. You can see he's just rolling over to let Wishful Winnings get on by. He doesn't want any kind of trouble right now. He's looking to just sort of pick up the scraps of points that he can towards the back of the field. He knows that today might not have been the day for him specifically. But looking in those bronze standings, you can see that despite his troubled performance over the start of the season, as we make our way into the second half, he is still a part of that top 5. He's ahead of Daily Boy, ahead of Dollar Up, ahead of Rafing, ahead of Reneze, who made his debut last round at the Snetterton doubleheader, and then ahead of Aussie. Admittedly, though, those are all bronze drivers that have yet to make appearances since last race, with exemptions to Reneze there, who didn't make an appearance for this one. Ahead of him there, only by, I must say as well, 16 points between himself and Jayco 14 is nothing to scoff at. He has made significant progress in his time, though it may not be as noticeable as some of the more breakout performances of the season. See here, Soviet Mario up the field at the moment. Jayco 14 and Tommy Johansson look to be our next potential fighters of the day. We're on board then with Tommy Johansson, in a bit of a rare sight to see here over the course of today's race in Monza. Not that we're going to be saying no to any imminent fights on the horizon. Right now, we're watching the fight for 10th from the perspective of the attacking car. Tommy Johansson, then Aston Martin versus Porsche, number 71 versus number 14. Let's see where things go with 10 minutes on the line. Watching the helmet cam here to give you some perspective of just how hard on the brakes we're getting down into turn 1. You can see the driver's head ducking down there from the G-forces, getting very, very stirred on the brakes. You can see a very slight movement of the wheel to the right-hand side, and that's just because they're running very low TC on these cars, so not a very high TC threshold. They are playing this very, very close to nearly no traction control intervention whatsoever, so the drivers are having to wrestle ever so slight with a little bit here and there of oversteer. There's a little bit of desync as well. That seems to have been an issue creeping in a little too much today. Too much for comfort, that is. The damage that appears on Tommy Johansson's car there may have been caused by desync, as he appears to be operating just fine in the 71 as he closes in on Jayco 14. Let's see if we can get a perspective then of the defending car of the two. Jayco 14 currently holding on to 10th position. See a bronze and a silver driver clash heads here on track is a rare sight indeed, but Monza has created such bizarre circumstances already over the course of the last 52 minutes of racing, so it's not really out of the realm of possibility for it to happen again. 8.5 minutes left to go on the exit of Ascari. Number 14 then 1.2 seconds up the road, controlling 10th right now. Catch up with these two in a moment's time. We'll check in around the paddock again. Again, it's a bit more of a quiet and somber ending for a race here in VSR, because I think the bulk of our action, the bulk of our chaos erupted in that opening half. And with Monza, it is usually those who end up surviving more so than anyone else that end up making it to that checkered flag. I mean, a lot of our more vigorous battles have come apart at the seams. There's very rarely been hopeful resolves to any one fight on track. That seems to be a little bit the gladiatorial ring that Monza tends to be on any calendar, is a track of pure survival. I mean, no prisoners taken, no quarter given. Most battles on this track will end up in disaster, and we've seen that logic in progress over the course of the last 53 minutes of racing. Silvio Mario then just simmering himself into the expectation for a solid podium finish today. While he may not be taking the gold by the way things are looking at the moment, it seems to have been a near flawless control of car by Just Boris, holding on to a 16.5, nearly 17 as a matter of fact. Yes, 17-second lead out past the Variante Ascari. It would seem to take utter disaster to shake the kind of progress the 999 has made over the course of today's race. And I must say, he's played quite sternly in the face of adversity. I'd say for even all three of the drivers currently on the podium. Now, we rambled at length in the start of today's session about the importance of straight line speed, but we also weighed it very duly in comparison to the importance of a well-rounded setup. Playing just by eye and gunning only for straight line speed is going to leave you suffering on all 11 corners the track has to throw in your direction. You see, these three drivers are principal examples of that logic. You have to play for the centre of the road. Even on a very low aero-dependent track like this, you cannot afford to go for the extremes. And this is the case in point. McLaren, Lamborghini and Ferrari all aim at times below the highest available top-end speed. Your highest top-end speed performers here at Monza, in the same records we've been taking, come from the Aston Martin V12 Vantage that can do 175 miles an hour, the Ford Mustang, the BMW M4 and the Lexus RCF that can all do 174 miles an hour. These drivers here in the Lamborghini and the McLaren, Just Boris and Soviet Mario, will be aiming in and around 172 and 170 miles an hour. The Ferrari of wishful winnings will be back up into the 172 margin, and they stand 10 toes on the same level as both Lamborghini, Audi and Aston Martin. They are dead centre of that chart. But despite on data and on paper being directly disadvantaged for straight line speed, I think it's both been the presence of the fact that there, or lack thereof presence, of many BMWs and Fords in this race. The only Ford in this race is VSR Antion, and he's hanging back inside the top 10 at the moment. And it's also been the lack of presence by BMW in its entirety there. If Elite Cassie had made an appearance in this race, I have no doubt he would have been challenging inside that top 5. As the BMW is just right at home on a track like this. It's a highly manoeuvrable car, even on the more loose and fast setups that we see on low aero-dependent tracks like Monza. It was a missed opportunity today, but it has given a bit of an underdog story for the manufacturers, as Just Boris obviously is world-class driver here in VSR. Or at least division-class driver for Xbox. He is definitely a recognised name. And Soviet Mario is getting up there for his exploits with the Euro Titans Endurance team. Wishful Winnings is getting up there as well in our record books as a very, very solid driver to watch. And all of them have been able to demonstrate their ability as drivers and as thinkers, I would say as well, because you need a solid setup, one that can't just work around a general principle, one that's got to work around you. You can see the distinct difference between the drivers that have gone in, they've tinkered with the setup today, and the drivers who have gone onto YouTube, looked up a setup and thrown it on the car. Because there's this degree of awkwardness in the way that they handle around the track. You don't see that in our top 3 at the moment. The only time we have ever seen anything close to a spat in performance was over Ascari. And that's because it's Ascari more so than it's because of the driver. We saw Soviet Mario was able to make quite graceful work of Ascari over the course of the last couple of laps. And for Just Boris, I mean, we see him approach Ascari right now and watch how he takes it, because it is just flowing around the corners. The Lamborghini, a little bit of desync there, it's just able to carve its way around. It's so calm, it's so measured. Boris is absolutely unstressed there. It's a relaxing Sunday driving mentality practically in that Lamborghini. It's got so much to give. And I'm frankly surprised, because for the longest time in my time as a commentator, I've never seen Lamborghini punch so above their weight as this. The one other example I can name is the exclusive cars performance of Stefano Fari and I believe Anthony Rodriguez over the course of the GHR XEC. That was one of our opening contracts, and that was back in 2023. So that goes to show you how long it's been since we've been properly shown what the Huracan is capable of. And who better to give you that kind of performance than last season's champion. Now on a championship defence, and right now been given the green light to absolutely guillotine the gap between himself and the current championship leader. 2.5 minutes then left to go. Not really much left on the table then. We are picking at scraps here in Monza. I think that's the same story for a lot of our drivers. Hin Papi may be vulnerable to the advances of Grizz. We'll be keeping an eye on these two then. They're out towards Ascari right now, having a look around the track again. And really, you are slim pickings for battles today. Much a different set of circumstances as to what we saw in the opening half. We can see Tommy looks to pick up a top 5 finish, which he won't be arguing with, especially given what went on with the number 66. Now, of course, he is still on a net negative finish. He did qualify in the top 3 and is right now outside of it. But given the kind of circumstances he's had to play against, especially with that huge kick out we saw earlier over Ascari, I don't think he's going to be arguing too much in the way that he didn't get what he deserved today on his comeback drive. Of course, everyone is going to think, well, obviously you can punch well above, but you can see it has been nothing but 100% by Tommy since that incident. He has not lifted a single time on the performance today. And sadly, had the race been a little bit longer, I have no doubt we'd be looking at Tommy fight his way back to a podium, but these are just not the circumstances at hand. He seems to be one of the more unlucky drivers on the grid, and I think, with all due respect, there is definitely a lot of respect that he does command that I don't think he realises. And really, we ought to respect that more out of him. Just on the fact that he is criminally unlucky in this sport. But it's just shown constant grit and determination. And fair enough for a top 5 finish. He'll always be wanting more. But really, on circumstances like that, that's probably the best he could have got. A lot of would have, could have and should have. Now as we get on board, we'll just quickly check in. Now, we saw this earlier on, was Hin Papi and Grizz, and that gap is pretty much dead set between the pair of them at the moment. So still looking around the field at where our nearest fights could be coming from. Tommy Johansson in the pit, so could it be 11th position on the horizon for Shawnee Mack? That would be one of the highest finishing positions he's had all season. Definitely the boosting confidence he's going to need. He's up to 11th then on the final lap. Looking around the field, Soviet Mario's 12 seconds away from wishful winnings. And Just Boris 16 seconds up the road from him, but he's caught up in traffic. So it appeared there, because he did drop quite a ways of time. You can see, though, right at the end of today's race, on the final lap, down towards the Variante Ascari, doesn't look to be any other fights watching at the moment. The 777 up the road is fairly close here to Hin Papi. They'll have one more lap to play against. Down towards the line they go. We'll be catching up with them in a moment's time. Just quickly looking in there. See what goes on, because it's an absolutely split-edge result here for these drivers. Down towards turn 1 they go. Right on the precipice of another race win today by Boris. Down through Retafilo goes Grizz. Quickly checking in then with Just Boris as down towards the line. The checkered flag does draw out for him for his 4th win this season. A fantastic result as he goes on to win today's race. Fantastic stuff by the 999. But let's quickly catch back on board on the fight to be for 7th. It's a delightful little surprise to have right here in the very last lap here at Monza to cover one more battle. We do have what looks to be fairly close stuff, but between cars on separate lengths of the race there. Chris, Shawnee and Oatsy. Let's get back on board though with Grizz and Hin Papi. We saw the Audi make the lunge down through Retafilo. He's up to 7th. Can he hold it for the rest of this lap here? It would be a fantastic final lunge for Grizz. Much the confidence that he needs after today's results. So I believe he was one of the drivers caught up in the aftermath of the opening straight incident, but has played his cards fairly well. And much like Tommy, has played much in the face of certain adversity and looks to be taking home a resounding 7th position. Of course, he still has Ascari to go up against. Not an easy section of the track for our mid-engine cars, and certainly not for the rear engines. Out through Ascari we go, 0.4 of a second. It could be all the way to the line here between these two. So let's watch on board with Grizz. Antion finishes 6th ahead of them. All the way down to the line then. It's going to be absolutely neck and neck out through the Curva Parabolica. Two differing lines there between Grizz and Hin Papi. 0.4 of a second. as we head down towards the checkered flag. It's very close between the pair of them, but taking home 7th is Grizz. Hin Happy behind them then takes home 8th. Get the full rundown of results here. We just quickly see Tyler Vermack hangs on to a top 15 result. Not too difficult when there's only 15 cars left in the race, but really, you got to owe it to him there. He's played up against quite poor circumstances for the 835 to bring home 12th position. Behind him there, VSR Abok finishes in 9th. Looking at the final standing result then, here in this race, Just Boris wins in Monza with Soviet Mario's second Wishful Winnings on a resounding podium return, really threading the eye of a needle to give him that result today, and he's kept his head down ever since. VSR Chris on a solid result then amidst the aftermath of the major incident down the opening straight, picks up 4th. Tommy returns to a top 5 finish after certain adversity forces him wayward at the Varianti Ascari. He's played very nicely against the odds to give himself another resounding top 5 finish. Antion then in 6th, up 2 positions from where he qualified. Grizz in 7th, Hin Pappy in 8th. Abok in 9th, and Jaco into the top 10. Shawnee Mack in 11th position. A solid result by the pair of them there, just in and out of the top 10 positions. Tyler Vermack, who we're seeing on screen at the moment, finished 12th. Tommy Johansson in 13th. Smiler 14th, and Otzi in 15th. DNFs then by Funky Fish, Twiglet, and Audi Pete. Well, it was certainly a bit more of a laid-back stream than we were expecting. Now, of course, that's a bit rich to say given the variety of major incidents we had on track, but such is the case for Monza. When you get out of the broader scope of incidents on track, it does end up becoming a bit of a tactical race. It does end up becoming, I wouldn't say boring, that's a discredit to the drivers, but it does become a bit more of a long-winded race. It's always going to lend itself towards more grander perspective. As obviously a Grand Prix and endurance racing circuit, that will tend to happen. It's simply a long-winded track by design, but our drivers have made mincemeat of it today in what was a very, very interesting race to behold here at round 9 of the championship. Just Boris then gets a 51-point yield. That's going to slice the gap down from the lead of the championship. Now, he won't be leading heading into Paul Ricard next week, but he is going to be ever, ever closer. So the imminent threat of a championship loss for White Doctor looms yonder the horizon here. Getting a look at the calendar then for the rest of the season. Next week, you'll be joining us in Le Castellet, France, at the Circuit Paul Ricard. Then the week after that, at the Circuit Ricardo Tormo, sometimes also called Valencia. And then to Barcelona the week after that, and Kyalami to bring us to the end of the line here in Season 8. Only 4 more weeks left to go from today onwards. It was a very exciting race then today in Monza. We hope you all enjoyed, and that's all from us here on TRTN. There was a sudden qualifying predictions as we try and navigate the menus there. But that is the end of the line for us today. And, well, what a result indeed. Very well done to Just Boris then. And very well done to the rest of our podium sitters, Soviet Mario and Wishful Winnings. I'd say driver of the day pick is pretty clear and defined. You're up to a coin toss here between Wishful Winnings and Tommy inside that top 5. Honorary mention to VSR Chris as well. Very, very well done today. That's all from us though on TRTN. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and take care. Good night.